Christmas Eve always looked the way holiday movies promised it should. The tree glowed in the corner, candles flickered along the windowsill, children moved between rooms carrying cookies and wrapping paper. Outside, fresh snow covered the neighborhood in silence. Inside, my family gathered around a long dining table that had hosted decades of Christmas dinners, and like many traditions, this one carried more history than anyone openly discussed. My father sat at the head of the table. As he always had, age had softened some parts of him. Not all of them. For most of my adult life, we had disagreed about what success looked like, not through arguments, through interpretation. My siblings had lives he understood immediately. One was a physician, the other managed a large engineering firm. Their accomplishments translated easily into conversation, titles, promotions, numbers. Achievements people recognized instantly. My own path was different. After leaving a stable corporate career years earlier, I had moved into community development work. The pay was modest, the hours were unpredictable, the results rarely fit neatly into a resume. I loved the work. My father never fully understood why. The evening began pleasantly enough. Stories circulated, presents waited beneath the tree. People laughed, then, as often happens in families, conversation shifted toward updates, careers, plans, future goals. My father praised my siblings sincerely. They deserved it. Then his attention moved toward me. The transition was subtle, but I recognized it immediately. He asked how work was going. I answered. He nodded, then came another question, and another. Each one slightly sharper than the last, not hostile, evaluative. The kind of questions that sound reasonable until you notice they all move in the same direction. Several relatives became quieter. They recognized the pattern too. Finally, while passing the turkey platter across the table, my father asked the question that settled heavily over the room. Do you ever worry you've settled for less than you're capable of? Silence followed. The kind that appears when everyone understands a conversation has become something else. I looked down at my plate, not because I lacked an answer, because I had heard versions of that question for years. Less money, less prestige, less certainty. In my father's mind, concern and criticism often arrived wearing the same clothes. He continued. You were always capable of more. Nobody interrupted. My mother stared into her glass. A cousin shifted uncomfortably. Across the table, my niece suddenly became fascinated by her mashed potatoes. I understood what my father meant, at least partly. From his perspective, he had spent his life climbing, profiting, building security. The choices I made looked confusing, maybe even reckless. The difficult part was that some of his observations contained truth. My career path had cost me financially. It had created uncertainty. There were easier lives available to me. What he couldn't see was why I stayed. Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. That's an interesting way to measure a life. Everyone turned. The speaker was Michael, a longtime family friend who had joined us for dinner after losing his wife the previous year. Most relatives knew him casually. I knew him differently. We had worked together on community projects for nearly a decade. My father smiled politely. Michael continued. I spent last month visiting one of the housing centers your son helped create. The room became still. I hadn't expected this. Neither had anyone else. Michael wasn't trying to rescue me. He was simply participating in the conversation. There were families there who would probably define success differently. My father listened quietly. Michael set down his fork. A former teacher living safely after years of instability. A pause. A veteran receiving support. Another pause. Children sleeping in permanent homes for the first time. Nobody spoke. The room had shifted, not dramatically, thoughtfully. Michael wasn't describing wealth or status or public recognition. He was describing impact, something harder to quantify, yet impossible to ignore. I met people who knew your son's name, he said. Not because he was famous. A small smile crossed his face. Because he showed up. The silence deepened. I felt strangely exposed. Not proud, not embarrassed, simply seen. For years, family conversations had focused on what my work wasn't. This was one of the first times someone described what it actually was. My father looked at me differently, not convinced, not transformed, just thoughtful. For perhaps the first time, he seemed to realize there were parts of my life he had never really examined. Eventually, he asked a quieter question. Why didn't you ever explain it that way? I considered the answer carefully, then shrugged. I think I spent too much time trying to justify my choices. The room remained silent, so eventually I stopped. Nobody knew what to say after that because the statement wasn't really about work. It was about something larger, the desire to be understood, the exhaustion of constantly seeking approval. Dinner continued. Conversations returned. Children opened gifts. Christmas moved forward. Later that evening, after most relatives had gone home, my father and I stood near the tree. Neither of us mentioned the earlier discussion directly. Instead, he looked at the ornaments for a long moment and said, I still don't know if I would have made the same choices. I smiled. I know. Another pause. Then he nodded slowly. But maybe that's not the point. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't complete understanding. It wasn't agreement. What it was felt more valuable. Curiosity, the willingness to reconsider a conclusion. As the lights from the Christmas tree reflected across the room, I realized something had changed. Not my life, not my choices, only the conversation around them. And for one Christmas Eve, that was enough.